Before becoming a climate activist, I was a migrant justice campaigner. I started supporting people in immigration detention and also stopping people's deportations. And after recognizing how climate justice is migrant justice, I decided to start up a collective with other migrant justice and climate justice campaigners, and we are called No Borders in Climate Justice. And our demand is clear. We need no borders to achieve climate justice. We believe that people should have the freedom to move and the freedom to stay. This means that we have to fight to end the climate crisis so that people will not be forced to move, and we must also fight for the abolition of borders so that as the climate crisis gets worse, people will be able to seek safety. And what we can see happening now with Marcus facing deportation is an example of the draconian border policies being used to deter people from taking climate action. And in the past year, we have seen this border violence increase through policies such as the Rwanda plan, such as housing people on floating boats. So we must smash this pattern of unjust treatment of people, which is rooted in racist notions of what nations are. Now is the time to recognize that climate justice is migrant justice. And in order to fight for climate justice, we need to fight for a world where borders are no longer rule our lives by ripping us apart from our families, from our friends, and from our loved ones, just as it is doing now to Marcus. We need to fight so that borders no longer decide who is worthy of a safe and dignified life. This government has been engaging in border violence by trying to deport anyone they deem to be unworthy or a threat. We can see this happening with Marcus. We can see this happen with the Windrush scandal a few years ago. And you can see this happening all the time in the UK, in particular with people who have criminal convictions. The other day I was talking to another friend who is supporting people in immigration detention, and she was talking about someone who was in his 50s and had been in the UK since he was a child. He'd spent his whole life working here, he has kids here, but he went to prison in his 20s. And though he has been out of prison for decades, the British state keeps on trying to threaten him with deportation, and they put him in detention centres. What we can see happening is what is happening with Marcus. It is a double punishment. You are punished for a crime by being put in prison, and despite serving your sentence, because you can never be seen as British enough, you are never forgiven, and the state will punish you again by deporting you. This is because borders are the physical manifestation of the systems of domination and racial hierarchy. And it is these systems that have also led to the climate crisis. Both the climate crisis and border violence are caused by the systems that allow rich people to get richer whilst exploiting the poor's labour and the world's natural resources. But borders do not really stop people from moving. All they do is make it more dangerous for people to move. For example, over 20,000 people have died in the Mediterranean region since 2014.
Shame.
And across Europe, people are beaten every day by police. They're locked up in detention centres and they're forced to stay in camps. And as the climate crisis worsens and more people are forced to move, the countries that are responsible for the climate crisis, countries like the UK, are the ones who are further militarising their borders. The power of borders to control who will move will become a power to decide who lives and who will die. We must abolish borders because we cannot allow the power to be in the hands of states who choose to support fossil fuel companies over people's lives. And yet we are told that it is a pipe dream to have no borders. But capital, big business, and the super rich already live in a world without borders. You see multinational companies cross borders to avoid paying taxes.
Yeah.
They set up factories that destroy the planet, and they exploit cheap labour by pitting workers of different countries against each other to a race to the bottom. It's one set of rules for them and another for the rest of us. In order to really achieve climate justice, we must have a world without borders for people, not just for money. And as we move closer to climate catastrophe, we know that we need to continue fighting the fossil fuel companies and the governments that support them. They may try to criminalize us. They may try to imprison us, and they may try to deport us. But we must stand together. We must fight this fight now. We must say that there is enough for all of us, because there is. We can see the evidence of this when the climate crisis worsens and we see the profits of oil companies go through the roof. We know that there is enough to go around. We just need to fight for it to be distributed. And this week we saw British tourists in Europe fleeing for their lives from devastating wildfires and being flown back to the UK. And we should show the same compassion to people who live in countries that are being destroyed by the climate crisis. We should not put up walls. We should be welcoming to all. Because when we stand together, when we stop fighting each other, that is when we will win. So we are fighting for the abolition of borders because we want an end to the hostile environment, an end to detention, an end to deportation and militarization and surveillance. We want people who have recently arrived in the UK or who have been living here without documents for many years to have the same rights and access to a home, a family and a dignified life just as everyone else. We want a world where we have the freedom to move and the freedom to stay. And so there's so much more to say about climate justice and migrant justice. I've only just touched on a few key points here. And what we're seeing with Marcus is just another violent part of the border regime. And it is also probably just the beginning of this border violence against climate activists. No borders, no nations, stop deportations! No borders, no nations, stop deportations!